and welcome to the 26th episode of the Unnamed Political Podcast. Jack?
Let me hold this book for you.
Today's episode is brought to you by The Art of the Deal by Donald J. Trump, a work of art second only to the Bible.
Rarely is the question asked, how is our children learning?
My fellow Americans.
Corporations are people, my friend.
Our country is in serious trouble.
I did not send classified material, and I did not receive any material that was marked or designated classified.
But man is not free unless government is limited.
Bringing you opinions on historic, current, and international politics. Welcome to the Unnamed Political Podcast.
On this episode of the Unnamed Political Podcast, we'll be discussing a small variety of topics in short 5-minute segments. The first of these topics, the recent Iowa Caucuses, which occurred this week. The first of the caucuses that will eventually determine the nominees for both the Republican and Democratic parties. Jack, would you care to fill the audience in?
So obviously the Iowa Caucus happened last week, as the time we're filming this. It happened in Iowa, obviously. That's no room for debate in that.
Comes along with the name.
And for the Republican Party, we had Cruz win. A surprise.
I wouldn't say it was a surprise, but it was...
I didn't see that coming.
Based on the polls, I thought it was a likely outcome. Based on the polls, and then obviously on the Democratic side, we saw actually the closest race in Iowa caucus history. Hillary Clinton literally, this is not an exaggeration, literally won by 6 coin tosses, which determined who certain votes do, which delegates or which votes went to which candidate.
By 0.3%. That was the gap.
I think it was mentioned on the Late Show, because that's called in Iowa, Carl. And... It's a small population state. Oh yes, very nice. Thank you for letting us steal your jokes. So what we're seeing here is, what do you think the fact, let's first focus on the Democrats, what do you think the fact that it was so close between Bernie and Hillary says about the Democratic Party and the race in a whole?
Well, for the Republican Party in particular, well, I'll go to the Democratic Party later, but for the Republican Party, usually when the Iowa Caucus happens, it's not the most likely candidate that goes on to win the election, right? Because in 2008, we had Huckabee, who
typically
is stinking now.
The early ones, well, actually, he's gone. He's dropped out.
He's dropped out. What am I talking about?
Well, what you see is typically the early caucuses do indicate, but they aren't guarantees. Yeah, as you said, we had Huckabee win in 2008, we had Santorum win in 2012, so on and so forth. But they are big boosts. You shouldn't kind of downplay it.
Right, but these aren't, these elections don't always appeal to the mainstream candidates, right? Because Cruz, Iowa's very, Christian, evangelical state.
They think that helped, but the evangelical vote for the most part was split 3 ways, with Cruz just, I believe, narrowly on top of that. I think around 25%, 25% evangelical vote. It was, for the most part, split between Rubio and Trump. Now, to kind of keep it brief, moving on to the Democrats. As we said before, and as you completely steered away from... Thank you. Yeah, thanks. But we saw the closest margins ever before between Bernie and Hillary. What do you think this says about the race? We saw quite a few things happen that people, in some ways, didn't expect. They had a much higher pro-Bernie turnout amongst the youth than was, in some ways, expected, but depending on who you talk to, was very likely.
So somewhere I got this from is that 84% of people under 30 voted for Bernie Sanders.
And that is a shockingly huge margin. The one thing I'm wondering, is that just out of Democrats, or is that out of the whole state?
I'm assuming it's out of Democrats.
But still, when you look at that, that's
huge.
Very big margin that you're seeing so many people, being drawn to democratic socialism. Do you think this says that the nation is getting ready to accept a democratic socialist as their president?
I think it certainly exposes how weak Hillary Clinton can be.
I think that's...
Because obviously when New Hampshire comes up, Sanders is going to school her, because that's basically, again, his backyard. And...
Well, we'll be discussing New Hampshire later,
You're
so...
Right. But in terms of the caucus, Hillary Clinton came in last in 2008, so I guess that's kind of a step up for her. But many were expecting that she'd win this by a decent margin, but I
thought she'd win, but I didn't think it would be this close at all.
This is basically a virtual tie, almost.
That's what it was said by the Sanders camp. They called it a tie. Hillary actually began to celebrate before it was even announced, which I think that did kind of hurt her in some respect, but it hasn't really been that advertised, so I don't think that'll hurt her. But just to wrap it up, we are now kind of seeing some tension rise in the Republican Party. We've seen the Cruz campaign and the Carson campaign start to have sparks fly, as there are allegations from the Carson campaign that Cruz, his campaign manager, tweeted that Carson, something along the lines of, oh, Carson is withdrawing, so you should vote for Cruz, not him. Do you think that'll explode into anything?
I doubt it. The Iowa Caucus, again, it's a noble thing to win, but I don't think it's going to develop into something that would bring down someone's campaign, especially with someone as much momentum as Cruz at this point. I don't think it's going to hurt him at all.
All right, so do you think that the Iowa Caucus is going to be an indicator of who the nominees will be?
I can't say yes, and I can't say no. I mean, this could definitely be a weird case, but usually, as history tells in the past, that usually the person who wins Iowa isn't the one who becomes,
Well, I'd say in the past it's told us this, but in the recent past, not so much.
Not so much, but I mean, assuming that we're in the recent past, it could be, again, a weird change of events, but I'm still highly doubtful, because again, 60%, I want to say 60% of Republicans in Iowa, I think this was said somewhere, are evangelicals. And only 20% of registered Republicans identify as evangelicals in the nation. So this could be a lot different.
And also they've said that the evangelicals are no longer as much voting because that person holds my beliefs. They're more voting for, at this point, who they think will govern the nation best. And I suppose, though, to end on a dramatic and totally not pre-planned note, if this election is telling us anything, it's that rules no longer apply. That was my news reporter impression.
That was pretty good.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, moving on to our next topic, New Hampshire.